today's show, I got a couple of topics I actually want to talk about. That this first one here is actually near and dear to my heart. And the reason why is because everybody who has listened to the show for, heck, even recently knows that I am a nerd. I'm more partial to Marvel. However, I do like DC a great deal. With that being said, you guys have probably noticed that I did a review on the new Spider-Man movie that came out, right? Did that one. Well, there was a DC movie that came out that was called The Flash, and if y'all noticed, I did no review on that movie. The reason why is because, much like every DC movie that has seen to come out lately, all the way dating back from 2020, I mean, if you look at this list, I mean, we got Wonder Woman 1984, which came out December of 2020, which wasn't good. We did get Zack Snyder Justice League, which came out in March 2021 on, I believe, HBO, so that didn't even hit theaters. But that one was actually better than even the first Justice League, so that one was okay. And then we got the Suicide Squad in August of that same year. Then we got Black Adam. Then we got Shazam. And then we got The Flash. And every single one of those movies were either subpar or just very disappointing. So with that being said, what I want to talk about today is actually, I want to give some tips of how the DC universe, how it can be fixed, how it could be better, how it can actually be an enjoyable movie watching experience for everybody who is a DC comic fan, who actually wants to see DC be great. So I'm going to provide some tips. And hey, if you're listening, DC, this is free of charge. You don't actually have to pay me anything. And if you are listening, you know somebody who happens to work for DC, go and pass along this information. Free of charge. Matter of fact, they can hit me up if they want some more. Won't charge them anything. I just won't name credits in the credits. But anyway, let me go to the first thing that I think DC should do with their movies to make them great is, for the love of all that is holy, stop introducing or putting other characters into your movies and just focus on the main character. For the life of me, I don't understand why DC keeps doing this. When the movie is about, for example, spoilers by the way if you haven't seen The Flash, so my apologies if you haven't. But actually, I won't even use The Flash as an example because I don't want to do that. I'll use a movie like Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice. I'll use that movie for an example. The name of the movie was Batman versus Superman, which means the movie should have solely focused on those two characters. But for whatever reason, they decided, you know what would be cool? What? Hey, maybe we should throw Wonder Woman in this movie for no reason at all. No backstory. Let's just throw her in there with the other DC superheroes, and everybody will think that's cool, right? And then fast forward to even the Justice League. Hey, let's just throw Aquaman. Let's throw all these other. We're just going to throw them off in this movie. We're going to throw the Flash. And hey, everybody's going to like it, right? And then Black Adam comes and then the same thing. Hey, let's throw Dr. Fate. Let's throw Hawkman. Let's keep throwing characters from DC into these movies and no one's going to care. Yes, we care. When the movie is named after a superhero, but some of the most memorable parts of that movie were actually the side characters that you're introducing instead of the main character that the movie is about, that is a problem. And the reason why actually brings me to my second point that DC should do, which is the story arc for each main character is important. Anytime you throw extra characters in there and you're not adequately building on the main character, your movie is going to fail. It just is. And I don't know, maybe DC just thinks, well, everybody knows who Batman is by now. Everybody knows who Superman is. Everybody should probably know who Wonder Woman is, and everybody should know all these characters. So what we're going to do, we're going to skip actually building them, and we're just going to throw them into this movie. Because, hey, DC Comics has been around since the early 1900s, so surely people have heard of all these superheroes before. No. That doesn't work. They need a origin story in their movies. It's why the first Wonder Woman was actually pretty good because it focused on her origin story, and we got to see how the Wonder Woman we got in Batman vs. Superman, we got to see it. Heck, I even like what they did with this current Batman with Rob Pattinson. I like the fact that they're showing him early on in his Batmanhood, if you will, learning how to become Batman. That right there is great. That right there is how you build the story. So now when they come out with another Batman, if they keep Rob Pattinson on, with me personally, I would, and I would just continue to build on the character of Batman, and we can kind of see him steady progressing, get better and more polished and stuff like that. That, DC, is how you build a character, not just automatically just throwing them into a movie or making a movie and, oh, that's what it is. This is what happened with this Flash movie. And I'm going to say this without trying to give spoilers, but it's exactly what they did here. They just figured that, oh, what we'll do is just throw him off and there's really no origin story. Like, they try to sneak it off in there because everybody who's read DC Comics knows the Flash's, backstory to a degree, right? So I don't want to say it just in case you didn't watch the movie, but everybody who's watched or read, DC Comics knows the Flash's backstory. But that's fine. But there's a lot of people watching the movie who don't, which means you should have actually started with that. That is vital. It's how people buy in and love the characters. It's what Marvel did. Why do you think people actually legitimately cried in the movie theater when Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man died? It's because Marvel built his story arc to the point to where people actually cared. They took it from us seeing him as this just narcissistic, rich, pompous billionaire who happens to be incredibly smart, he can build cool tech, to this guy who will be willing to sacrifice everything to save everybody. That's the progression in people's character that DC needs to have for each one of their superheroes. If they do that, that is how you're going to get people to buy in. It's how you're going to get people invested and wanting to invest in your product. Which leads me to my third point for DC. And I say this with all due respect, but why does the makers of the old makers, because obviously James Gunn is the director now, but believed that they could actually put some comedic aspect into DC when DC primarily in the comics, they are pretty dark, which means DC movies should be a pretty similar thing, which means they need to be true to who you are. Be true to your comic book base. DC Comics, ladies and gentlemen, for people who don't know who's listening, they're pretty dark. When you look at certain stories, right, like The Blackest Night, which was a story about the Black Lanterns and zombies and all this cool stuff, right? Pretty dark story of how that universe fell to that. And then you look at Injustice, right, where the Joker basically tricks Superman into killing his love Lois Lane, and then Superman comes in and basically punches Joker's heart right out of his chest, kills him, and then basically says, you know what, screw this, I'm taking over the world. If you do something bad, I'm murking you. That dark, that kind of stuff. Heck, even what this latest Flash movie, from what I heard, was supposed to be based on, which is the Flashpoint storyline in DC, which set up the New 52, but in comics, but that comic was also dark. But for whatever reason, DC tries to do this in-between thing when it came to like comedic, and then they try to add some dark elements. But look, it just needs to be dark and grimy. That's what most of DC is. Like, if you want to have a little bright spots in like the Superman comics because he's all about, truth, justice, and the American way and all that stuff, then, you want to brighten that up, fine. You want to do that a little bit for Wonder Woman too, fine. But most of DC movies needs to be more dark, which means their movies are probably going to be PG-13 or rated R. And I get that the goal, right, is to create a family movie and have a family atmosphere, so that way adults who have kids will want to bring their, children with them to be able to see the movie. So I do understand that could turn some parents off, depending on the parent, because nowadays. But anyway, let me get back on. Let me not get off track. But I get how that can turn some parents off and maybe not want them to come watch your movies. I do understand that. But if you can make it to where it's not just like supery duper dark, but dark enough, I think they could do that. I think DC could pull that off. And if they did, their already fan base that they have from the comics, they're going to come and stay. And then you'll start to get other people, latch on, right? And actually wanting to do that if these three things that I've mentioned so far, if they actually do. Which leads me to my last point that I want to talk about. So I know I mentioned that, I think everybody knows by now, James Gunn, who was the director of pretty much every other Guardians of the Galaxy films. He also worked on some other Marvel projects. He is now basically the lead dog in DC. He's the man. He's basically the Kevin Feige of DC. So with that being said, with him being over the production now of DC, every DC movie can't feel like a James Gunn film. Here's what I mean by that. If anybody listening have seen any of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, take this last one. There's always these like kind of hyped, scenes that happen in it. There's obviously some comedic value in it and stuff like that, right? Coming from Drax and just a lot of other characters, Rocket, they're kind of witty and quirky and all that. Well, the DC movies, they all can't feel that way. Now, some of them can. Like, for example, I think, if I'm correct, that the Blue Beetle movie, I think he actually helped. I know that was in production, I believe, prior to him actually taking over, but I think he kind of helped a little bit. Like, if Blue Beetle wants to be a little more comedic with his character, but also able, to, slice and dice and all that, that's fine. But every movie that comes out cannot feel like a James Gunn film, because much to my third point that I mentioned about DC being true to who they are, he's going to have to play in to the dark theme with most of their movies and most of their comic book superheroes and villains, I believe. It can't be all Guardians of the Galaxy and, Drax, lines, or Mantis and Star-Lord. Like, it can't be that. Gamora, like, it can't. It has to be dark. Some, sure, not all. And I think if they do that, if they do these things that I mentioned, DC can actually be it can carve out a niche of its own.